I want you to picture someone you know well, someone you've had a laugh with, someone who you've shared personal information with, someone you can call a friend. Now, what if that person had been lying to you about who they are? What if they'd been recording your conversations? What if that person was actually a police officer? Today, I'll be speaking to Neil Woods, who spent over a decade working as an undercover cop and now speaks out against police corruption. On this channel, I've previously spoken to some of the victims of a deeply disturbing scandal which involved undercover police officers infiltrating activist groups, sometimes forming long-term intimate relationships with them. This led to a groundbreaking ruling involving a formidable list of human rights breaches by the Metropolitan Police. Since then, highly controversial laws have been passed granting undercover police and informants blanket immunity to participate in criminal offences. Now you're about to hear about the life on the inside of this shadowy world, to understand how undercover surveillance tactics work. Thank you to Big Brother Watch supporters who've submitted questions to Ask Neil and who directly enable our campaigning efforts to defend freedom. You can find a link to become a Big Brother Watch supporter in the comments section of this video.
My name's Neil Woods. I'm a former police officer, former undercover police officer from the UK. Now I'm a board member of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership in the United States and chair of the organisation in Europe and the UK. Well, I spent many years working undercover. I did a lot of undercover work between 1993 and 2007. And when I began, I was very much invested in that kind of work, almost all drugs investigations. But eventually, and I was a bit slow for this to dawn on me, but I realised that not only was I causing harm to individuals and very much vulnerable people who needed help, but I was also causing harm to communities and society in its wider sense. And since then, I've learned a great deal more, and I suppose I dipped my toes also into wider issues of civil liberty and certainly the impact that the tactics of undercover policing has on people and society.
For those who don't know, how is undercover policing used in the UK? And, for example, is it only used to investigate certain crimes?
Well, an important fact that I should start with is that 95% of undercover policing, at least, is about investigating drugs offences. It's primarily a war on drugs tactic. There are, of course, other use of undercover police officers as well, and that is similarly disturbing. And I'm sure many people watching this will have heard of the SpyCops scandal in the UK, where undercover police were used to infiltrate activist groups, anti-racist groups, environmental activists, animal rights organisations, in order to watch them, spy on them. Usually without any action, actually, because the SpyCops, both the Special Demonstration Squad and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, those two organisations which ran those SpyCops, they didn't actually bring any prosecutions. They just spied on people. Now, theoretically, the idea was to learn about and preempt any subversive action which might cause harm to our nation. But really, from what's come out so far, it just seems like people were just being spied upon in the most horrific and intrusive way. As if undercover work wasn't horrific and intrusive enough in itself. Some of these officers were actually having relationships with women and sexual relationships with them, which, as a bit of an old school detective, I'd personally call that rape.
How do you think it will change undercover policing in the UK? Do you think it has and will change undercover policing in the UK? Obviously, the inquiry is still going on.
So, the SpyCops scandal has certainly, with some pockets of the population, has made them aware of what's going on. And it has horrified many people, but in my view, it's not horrified enough people. It's not held the headlines anywhere near as much as it should do. Now, obviously, we have this inquiry going on, the Mitting inquiry, which theoretically should be adequately studying what's happened and asking the right questions as to who directed these police organisations to spy on people and for what reasons. But I don't have any faith in the Mitting inquiry. I'm afraid I remain pessimistic. But while the inquiry's been going on, the government has quite happily been putting in legislation which would counter many of the potential conclusions that the inquiry could come to. And specifically, I'm referring to the CHIS Act, the Covert Human Intelligence Source Act, which many of us, including Big Brother Watch, campaigned against when it was still the CHIS bill. That act essentially preempts some of the most sinister aspects of the SpyCops scandal by actually making the activity of both police undercover police and police informants as to be protected by law, so that if you commit a crime during the operation, you can be exonerated, you are immune from prosecution. And it's not just the legislation, it's also the psychological impact to every undercover police officer and government spy in the shape of an informant. It's a big difference, trust me, to know that you have that immunity enshrined in law.
Do you think, from your experience before, that the system worked well enough that the CPS could only prosecute where there was public interest to do so, and actually, for the most part, the system worked fairly? Do you think that's a reasonable thing to suggest?
Yeah, the suggestion that the system before the Act was better than the system now. Now, let me put it this way. Let me put it into context for people in a really simple way to make people understand just how powerful undercover police and informants are. If a police officer wants to search your house, they need a search warrant. In order to get that search warrant, they need to provide really credible information, bits of evidence, to convince a police inspector that they should be allowed to apply for a search warrant. The inspector will agree after asking certain questions. The police officer will then have to go and speak to a magistrate's clerk and convince the magistrate's clerk that they have enough information to justify the rather serious deed of searching someone's house without their consent. If the magistrate's clerk agrees, you will then go to the magistrate, who will ask their own questions, and if they agree, you then have your document, which means that you can go into someone's house without their consent and search through their most private things. That's judicial oversight, an important piece of judicial oversight. If the police want to enter your life as an undercover operative or send a police informant into your life to find out your most private things and your most private thoughts even, there's no judicial oversight. All of that is decided in-house. All of that management of that is decided in-house. There is no judicial oversight at all. And I would argue that the most intrusive thing the government can do is to send an agent into your life. I was good at what I did because I am incredibly manipulative. I have the skills to manipulate individuals and whole social groups around me. I knew I was good at that, and I revelled in developing those skills. I can make people jump to my tune. I can have people in the palm of my hand. And there was no judicial oversight for my actions.
Do you think undercover police are still deployed in protest settings in the UK in 2024? And do you think that they could be obvious to activists? Are these people easy to spot?
I'm afraid it is in the nature of the skill set and the developing skill set within undercover policing that we're difficult to spot. Obviously, some are better at it than others. Some are more vulnerable to being spotted because of the circumstances in which they find themselves. And unfortunately, I can't really offer any tips on how you might spot them. Common sense is the key to unlock that door in terms of what questions you can ask and how you can follow up those questions. I mean, I would be shocked if it was going on to the extent that it was. I would be shocked if it was going on to the extent that it was in terms of developing personal relationships, because the Metropolitan Police has left itself wide open to huge payouts for the harm that it's caused. And it has paid some out, and it probably will end up paying more out. And if there's one thing the police service is fearful of is having to pay out huge sums of money. So I think that will have put a brake on certain tactics that political spying will do, but I don't doubt that in this current climate of growing political fear of the impact of climate protests, that there will be police undercover operatives in one shape or another out there amongst activist groups. Quite definitely. They will be turning up to open meetings. They will be feeding into databases about what's planned.
Do you have any experience of using technology to kind of surveil people, whether it be in the course of your time as an undercover officer or in the operations kind of surrounding the course of your work directly?
I have used technology as supporting evidence for work that I did, and I have some familiarity with it. For example, when I got to a stage of an operation where I needed corroboration, I would use very tiny recording devices with both a hidden camera and recording device. I suppose that was only really reinforcing the intrusive nature of the work that I was doing. I've also used phone recording equipment, and lots of the evidence which also supported the evidence I gathered was things like phone data and phone GPS data, that kind of thing, so to track people's movements, the phone calls that they made, although not actually the phone, the actual conversations, that wasn't captured.
Do you see a pattern of police, having tools at their disposal and then wanting to reach for the levers wherever they are? Because it seems to be the case, from the live facial recognition work, that this is the shiniest new tool that they want to use.
I see it as sort of being sort of geometrically problematic. So, for example, right, the technology, you have an observations point, or you have a series of observation point around premises which are suspected of drug dealing, right? And during any kind of investigation into a premises where there might be drug dealing, you'll see lots of people coming and going. And you keep on a log, you make a log about this, a male wearing a red coat, approaches the target premises, and you're making assumptions, but you're recording lots and lots of information about people. But not all of those people will be criminals. Now, previously, that kind of extreme levels of data from different observations points and different investigations normally sits on a file and doesn't harm any of those individuals that have been observed. But if you're able to collate all of that information for every single person that you're observing, and you put it onto an intelligence database, then that can feed into the bigger beast of a camera which is set in a street, for example, watching for people who may be of interest. Now, that person of interest may well have been generated by police activity in the first place. So it increases exponentially who is suddenly being brought into the attention of the police. And most of those people will not be worthy of the attention of the police. So we're creating a bigger net to cast, and more people will have their lives interrupted with no justification whatsoever. And there is no antidote to that, because lots of police will keep working hard in their own areas, and they will keep feeding their images into the intelligence base, into the intelligence database. And the technology and the ability to do that will only continue to grow. So the tendrils, the web, will only grow with time. So unless we get a grip with this ability for police to react to what a camera's eye sees, now we are looking at a very, very grim future of an erosion of civil liberties. Very grim indeed.
So we have a question from a Big Brother Watch supporter, Mario, who says, can the police perform random surveillance on individuals, or does it have to be triggered necessarily by criminal activity?
So, for example, when I was about to begin an operation, at the point that I was brought in as the undercover operative, before that point, there would have to have been intelligence and evidence presented, an authority gained, and a decision approved that the targets of the operation were not only causing criminal activity, but also that normal means of policing were not possible or not practical. So for that, you would sometimes have to prove that attempts to investigate these individuals by conventional detective work had been tried and failed, or present evidence that the targets had already circumvented normal detective work by some of their activities. So theoretically, the bar is quite high for the approval of undercover work, theoretically. And actually at that point, then it would be the duty of the undercover operative to actually also challenge the intelligence. So I would be expected to read all of the intelligence and the justifications offered for this operation, so that I personally was also happy with the work that had gone in to justify my involvement. So all of these things, I mean, they sound really impressive. But for the SpyCops, they didn't have to consider any of that, because they weren't intending to take a case to court.
Something that is always put to us is this idea that if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. How would you respond to someone saying that to you?
As a young cop, I would have agreed with the sentiment that, well, if you've got nothing to fear, what have you worried about? You know, you're not the person we're after. And I have drastically changed my view in that regard, as I've understood the impact of an erosional of people's personal liberty has had. I now believe, having spent many years being the oppressor, I now believe that as an individual, no one has the right to tell me what I can put into my body. No one has the right to tell me what I can do to my body and my mind with any drug. No one. I didn't always have that view. But if you take the view that we should control the way people's brains work and what people do with what they consume of their own free will if they're not hurting somebody else, then you're taking a very powerful view of the need to control others. And that need to control others is desperately damaging. And one of the things that's driving this move towards a more autocratic state and more oppressive legislation is in fact drug policy itself, because we as a population have got used to the fact that government can punish people even for what they consume or what they do with their mind and body. So if the government can control that, what's wrong with controlling everything else that people do? But essentially, I think that freedom of will and freedom to live our lives as we choose should be cherished, and it shouldn't be eroded away. And once you start to be comfortable with the erosion of those other people, the liberties of those other people, then look over your shoulder, because they're coming for you next. So where do you draw the line? I remember a good friend of mine, Annie Marchand. She used to work for MI5, and she cites a fascinating study about East Germany. And there is no more frightening example of the power of the police state than East Germany. And she cites a study where artistic creativity dried up in East Germany. Completely dried up, and is a really fascinating study that the oppressive nature of that totalitarian police state affected everybody's mood. It affected everybody's creativity. It affected everybody's ability to be happy and free of anxiety. And we should strive to fight that, and we should strive for the opposite, where creativity is encouraged and our policies and our societies is driven to make that flourish.